we did see a good one. The market up by 0.3%. I think technically it was very nice to see the market get away from that 5,300 point level, which we broke through last week. So technically looking a little bit better for the market. Of course, all eyes were on the oil price in Asian trade after that Iran 6-month nuclear deal was signed, and we did see oil prices plummeting by 2.2%. The flip side of that is lower oil prices tends to be good news for the economy. It cuts costs for businesses, and it also means that consumers have more to spend because they don't have to spend as much on petrol. So we did see the US futures up by 0.3%, pointing to another record session in the US tonight. It's going to be a pretty quiet week for the US, though. We see Thanksgiving this week, which means the market's closed on Thursday in the US, and then it's only a half day on Friday. But all in all, every sector on the market higher, with the one exception of energy, and that's not surprising given the tumble that we saw in oil prices. We saw 52-week highs for Oz Forex. It had a fantastic performance today, as well as James Hardie and BlueScope Steel. But on the flip side, the gold miners still not doing too well. We saw Newcrest as well as Perseus Mining hitting a 52-week low.
Oil, we saw, not surprisingly, some interesting moves in the oil price on the back of some of the geopolitical, I suppose, movements, if you like, in regards to Iran. Did we see the oil producers impacted at all?
Lower oil price and the energy sector did come under pressure, especially Oil Search as well as Santos. Now, both of these companies do have production coming online in 2014 in the Papua New Guinea project. But I guess if we have a look at lower oil prices, generally this is good news for the economy. It cuts companies' costs, and it also cuts consumers' costs as well. And essentially, it acts like an interest rate cut on the market. And if we have a look at this deal, it's a temporary deal, it's a 6-month deal, but it will mean the easing of sanctions, and it will probably mean that we'll see an addition of 800,000 barrels of oil per day to the global market, which stands at about 89 million barrels per day. If we have a look at the significance to Iran, back in 2012, we actually saw oil sales making up 80% of exports for Iran. But in 2013, we've seen that drop off by around about 1/3. So essentially what this means is we'll probably see downward pressure in oil prices, and we'll see oil prices probably down by $10 to $15, we think. And that will mean the Brent crude price drops below 100 US a barrel. It's currently standing at about 120 US a barrel. But in Japan, we have seen the Brent crude futures falling down 2.2%.
So on the medium-term outlook for some of the big energy plays like a Woodside on our markets?
I guess the difference between Woodside and an Oil Search and a Santos is that Woodside Petroleum earlier on in the year did change its dividend policy. So with an 80% payout ratio, it's really looking more like an income stock rather than a growth stock at the moment. I think near term with Woodside Petroleum, you still want to be watching the Israeli assets, and that's probably where the key risk comes from. If we do see a change in the 30% stake that it has in that project, that would be seen as a negative for growth. But in terms of both Santos as well as Oil Search, it is about the huge liquefied natural gas projects coming online, and they are nearing completion. The first one, the PNG, the Papua New Guinea LNG project, and then the Gladstone LNG project. So we are going to see a massive increase in terms of cash flow in 2014. If we have a look at in the case of Oil Search, it's been quite honest that in the short term that there may be a gap in terms of funding, and that it may need short-term funding before the cash flow from Papua New Guinea starts to roll in. So that's one of the key things that we're watching with Oil Search very carefully, because they have been quite frank about that. And I guess the question for shareholders is, do we see a capital raising before the Papua New Guinea production comes on?
$9.20, is that going to be the final price? Do you think we're going to see some more action?
I think Saputo really needs to get some of the big shareholders on board if it's going to be able to get 50% or more of the shares. And that $9.20 bid only comes through if it does get more than 50% of Warrnambool Cheese and Butter's shares. And of course, the problem is these massive stakes in Warrnambool Cheese at the moment. The 18% by Murray Goldman, the 17% by Bega Cheese, and the 10% by Kieran and Lion. And, you know, none of these companies look willing to negotiate at this point. It does look like they've got their own reasons for being in Warrnambool Cheese and Butter, and it doesn't look like they are backing the Canadian Saputo bid. So really for Saputo, it does mean getting some of those major shareholders on board, and unfortunately 2 of those major shareholders have a bit of their own on the table, so it's a pretty difficult one here. Yeah,
Warrnambool Cheese in the end closing up 2% at $9.23, so just above latest bid price by Saputo. Not faring so well today, Julia. ALS interim report down about 2.2%.
If we have a look at ALS, there's a number of different units, but really I think the unit which weighed on its results is the mining area. If we have a look at the EBITDA which came through there, we did see a fall of 45%. So mining still remains the difficult part for ALS, and really if we have a look at the markets which are causing it pain, it's places like West Africa as well as Canada and South America as well. So no huge surprises given that we have seen a lot of bad news recently out of that mining services area. On the flip side though, one of the areas of strength was the energy space where we actually saw EBITDA up by 50% there. So that was a positive, but also the industrial space we saw a fall of 11%, and that says as we see some of these areas being quite weak, people start to delay some of the maintenance work or put it off, and that has an impact on the industrial section. So unfortunately not a good result coming through from ALS, and the stock was down around about 1.5% today.
All right, guys, got to leave there. Big thank you as always to Julia Lee from Bell Direct, and of course Michael McCarthy from CMC Markets Stockbroking. We are going to head to a break. When we come back, more from my guest host, of course David Mantry from Belvedere Share Managers. We're also going to be talking to Mark Bailey from Equasia. Lots of corporate offerings hitting the market. We'll hear from him next.
This isn't just a hospital, because it's much more than just wards, halls, smocks, scrubs and busy people. It's brilliant machines, reaching beyond these walls, connecting doctors to hard